Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my privilege to welcome you on behalf of the Indo German Chamber of Commerce, VDA, ACMA and SIAM to our today's webinar, Indo German Exchange on restart of the auto industry amidst and after COVID-19. I have eminent experts from the field, Dr. Kurt Christian Scheel, he's Managing Director of VDA, the German Association of the Automobile Industry. Then Mr. Vinny Mehta, the Director General of the Auto Component Manufacturers Association of India, ACMA, and Mr. Rajesh Menon, Director General of SIAM, the Society of Indian Automotive Manufacturers Association. Today in this webinar, we are trying to give you an insight into the current situation of the automotive industry in India and in Germany and also globally. And later we are present here for your questions. I understand we will have up to 500 participants. More is not possible. If there are more than 500 participants, Vinny has committed a discount on the car that the over 500 are buying since they cannot join us in. I'm sure that will be manageable. So, ladies and gentlemen, the last time many of us met was at the Auto Expo in New Delhi. At that point in time, nobody would have anticipated that in the month of April in India, not one single car got sold. Had we anticipated that, we probably would not have come to the fair. But nobody knew. And when I'm looking at the situation last year in September, when we all met in Frankfurt at the IAA, nobody anticipated anything like that either. We of course knew all the industry is challenged, especially in India, the industry was challenged. And in the remarkable speech by Chancellor Merkel for the opening in Frankfurt, she pointed out that there has to be a reset for the industry with regard to environmental standards, with regard to compliance, with regard to so many things. But also she is a very clever, experienced politician, she didn't even dream of the possibility that from March onwards, the world would come to a standstill, and at least for some time the topic of bad air in Delhi or in Mumbai would be a non-topic. And it's quite interesting also to see that when we've been saying something has to happen with the traffic in India, the congested roads, the bad air, everything, that the consequences by the Indian government would be as dramatic as they were. And they just decided to lock everything down. Those are sometimes the things you cannot even dream of that happen. And now the question is, what is the way forward? Where are we going to? Where is the industry going to? And how is the restart going to look like? This is why we have the experts here today, and this is what we want to discuss with you. The situation in the automotive industry is maybe typical for the global situation. The discussion we had about emissions, the discussion we had about traffic situation in the big cities like Mumbai or Delhi, or look at cities like Bangkok or other huge cities in especially Asia, but even in Germany, the question about traffic jams piling up, the questions about cities being congested is a topic that has been there all the time. And especially in Germany, the discussion about electromobility, the discussion about the new emission standards, especially from the EU, and the question about pollution in cities has gone up to an extent that there were struggles between various states, between various political parties. And therefore, the automotive industry in this respect is a core industry where now after Corona, things will probably change, and the opportunity to have a restart in a different manner is very much there. In Germany, last week, the government has passed a support concept to the tune of 125 billion euros. Now, I have no clue how much that is in crores, but I can tell you it's a lot of crores. And in this package, one of the elements is that the support for electromobility has been increased further. Dr. Scheel, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think now in Germany, when you buy an electric car, you get a subsidy of 9,000 euros, out of which I think 6,000 euros is paid by the industry and 3,000 by the government, or the other way around, doesn't matter. But correct, it has been increased further. But, and that is, I think, the significant point, because there was a lot of lobbying, of course, by the industry to have, like in 2009, another scrap premium, where basically you could hand in your old car and get a huge discount on your new car. And the discussion was whether that could come up no matter what kind of engine your car has, whether it's petrol, diesel, or electric. Now there, even though the especially the Minister for Economics, Mr. Altmaier, has pushed, as I understand, very much for that scrap premium, it didn't happen. And only that electromobility support got increased, which I think is an interesting move. There's a lot of discussion actually at the moment in the Social Democratic Party in Germany, whether they should have fought more for the scrap premium, because for many of the manufacturers, the electro cars are only a very small element of sales. The main element are still the traditional combustion engines. And if they don't get the scrap premium, people will not be inclined so much to buy those. And that also means a lot for the employment in the car industry and the return to something normal. So from that angle, to the benefit of our Indian friends, and Mr. Scheel will elaborate on that more, I presume, the situation also in Germany with the car industry is very, very interesting and also quite open. So from that angle, we are all living in a time of the unknown. And like always in times of disruption, there are also times of opportunities. And this is what we want to highlight also in this webinar, that we see a lot of opportunities. Sometimes when you are sitting in a situation like this, where everything is closed down, where we still have no flights to India, where we have only basically flights to repatriate Indians to India who are stuck abroad, and flights to repatriate Germans or other nationals to their home countries, but no proper flights. And also it is not foreseeable when these flights will pick up. We only think of the bad situation. The situation is tricky, no doubt about it. But on the other hand, we also see a lot of opportunities. India is one of the interesting countries in the world. After the challenges that we've seen in China, India will be certainly one of the countries in the region to look at. India is not alone there, there are other countries as well, but still in India, the demand will rise. The COVID crisis will come to an end. At the moment, of course, the cases are still increasing, but it will get under control. I have no doubt about it. And looking at, for instance, in the car industry, in the car consumption, so to speak, per capita, it is still extremely low. And now that only BS6 cars can be sold, there will be a lot of catch-up to be done once we are getting back to normal. In China, maybe just one example, after the lockdown was lifted, many people, for whatever reason, thought, now I have to do what I never did before. And the whole annual production of Porsche in China, I understand, has been sold. They are calling this revenge shopping. So basically people, after having been locked down, are saying now I will do what I've never done before, and I will buy a car that I was always dreaming of. Now, whether that revenge shopping will really happen also in India, I don't know. We will have to see. But that is maybe one of the arguments we can take when things come somewhere back to normal. The Indian automotive industry, and the experts from the field will tell us more about it, has done a lot in the last years. Ultra modern factories have come up for huge volumes, and the sales will happen. I'm absolutely confident. Maybe it take a little longer, but it will happen. When we will come back to the levels before COVID, that we will have to see. Some people say 2021, some people say 2022. That will have to be seen, but I'm sure the numbers will go up, and we have to be prepared, because the Indian consumer wants a car, there's no doubt about it. And maybe with COVID, even the trend to individual driving, to individual mobility and not public transport will also increase. So from that angle, I think it's interesting times. I was given 15 minutes for the introduction. Now I've been speaking for 12. I think that is really enough. And therefore, I would now like to hand over the floor to Dr. Scheel to enlighten us about the situation in Germany. Dr. Scheel is an expert in the field, and he is not only an automotive expert, if I may say so, but he is also an expert in sustainability, and he's an expert also in the political environment, because he not only was working for BDI, which is the German CII, if you wish, the industry association, but he's also been working for many years for Bosch. And Bosch, of course, in India is known like it is an Indian company, has been here for almost 100 years. So he also knows exactly the political scenario in Germany with regard to the automotive industry. And I can tell you, the political situation in Germany is so critical for the automotive industry. If there were chancellors like Mr. Schröder, who were called auto chancellors, because Mr. Schröder, coming from Hanover, he was on the board of Volkswagen when he was the chief minister, and he was a real strong supporter of the automotive industry. And so in Germany, where 7% of GDP comes from automotive industry, similar to India, it is absolutely critical to have a close contact with the policymakers. Otherwise, you can run in the totally wrong direction. And therefore, Mr. Scheel is well equipped, and no wonder that he is now managing director of VDA. So we're privileged, Dr. Scheel, to have you here, and we are looking forward for your presentation. Mr. Scheel, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Steinrücke, for this very friendly introduction. And ladies and gentlemen, good day, and my best greetings from Berlin. I'm very happy that we can do this together with our friends from ACMA, SIAM, and IGCC. I'm very grateful to all those who have set up this meeting to make this possible, because our long-standing partnership and friendship with ACMA and SIAM is a very stable one, and I personally was very happy and proud to also be able to attend Auto Expo in February. And indeed, as Mr. Steinrücke said, if we all would have known what was before us, we would of course have cherished being together even more than we did in Auto Expo in February, which from my point of view was a very successful and a very positive and enchanting experience. So let me develop a little bit on where we stand with regards to the COVID crisis and what our experiences are in Germany before we have ample time also for questions and answers. Interestingly enough, the COVID crisis had a first hit in Germany already end of January, because there was one supplier in the south of Germany, Webasto, who is producing transparent rooftops for cars, who has been hit end of January by an outbreak of COVID. So Webasto had first-hand experience of having to lock down parts of research and development, parts of production, on how to organize the working together on a more digital way, on how to organize confinement for many of their associates with regards to the possible with regards to the need to confine a possible spread of the virus. And so there was a lot of experience being collected. It was not always easy, but let me say that our colleagues at Webasto managed this crisis very, very well. Everybody was very innovative and creative in dealing with this innovative situation, and the colleagues were sharing this experience freely with others. So there was already something which we had the possibility to build upon when in mid-March the crisis hit really strong. Mid-March, OEMs and suppliers decided to more or less totally, not fully, but more or less at least to close down to a very large extent their production facilities. First because of the need to comply with health and safety needs, but also because demand for cars and also for components was in free fall at that time. And if there was one experience also from the crisis of 2008, 2009, then that it is very dangerous to produce and not being able to sell. So because of that, production fell to a low of minus 93% in April. Sales dropped by 61% in April. Our prognosis for the whole year with regards to production is around minus 20%. And the scale of the recession for the economy in Germany as a whole is quite strong. I mean, there are many numbers out there. Somehow it's not easy to predict on what will happen, particularly in the second half of this year. But numbers around 6% seem to us the most plausible approaches to what we might expect from the year as a whole. Right now, when it comes to sales, we do not see a strong pickup, though since the end of April, beginning of May, the dealerships are allowed to open again, though under very strict health and safety conditions. OEMs and suppliers start to restart production, at least to a certain extent, mostly in a single shift mode. Value chains are reactivated, also with regards to our value chains across borders, like to Italy, to Slovakia, to France, to Spain, and to our whole European and international networks, which is not always easy, but things in this regard are working out more or less as expected, and working out quite well. However, as long as sales will not pick up, of course, the production is somewhat hampered as well. And what we have to now wait for is on how the measures decided upon by the government, I will come back to that later, will really motivate the consumer, and we will really motivate the economic actors in order to restart the demand. Over 50% of the workforce has been on so-called short-term employment. Short-term employment meaning that our associates work less, and for the volume which is not for the volume where our associates do not work, they are paid 60% out of the social security network of their net income, which would have been earned otherwise. And this number is still is going down only very slowly, because there's still a lot of production capacity being unused. So there's still a lot of short-term employment, which is of course also not easy for our associates and not easy, of course, for the pickup of demand. If we look at what government measures has been, we can look at three phases. The first phase was the shutdown. During the shutdown phase, in particular in March, we have worked on two priorities. The first priority was liquidity, because of course, without sales, liquidity is the basic problem. So we have, together with the government, worked for a broad set of measures to preserve liquidity in companies, tax breaks, additional loan facilities, additional facilities to stretch the timeline for the payment of social security bills, and so on and so forth. Government has been very fast, and also Parliament has been very fast in implementing a long range of measures to preserve liquidity, and it has been quite successful. Second priority has been mobility. In particular, as you know, in Europe there are many borders, and suddenly the borders came up again. Border controls between Germany, Poland, France, Italy, Austria have been re-implemented. We have worked hard with our government and with the government of neighboring EU member states and with the EU Commission to help the flow of parts, of products, to be able to pick up again soon. And I have to say also, this has worked up quite well. After 2 weeks or 3 weeks, the mode of deliveries and the mode of transport for goods, but also for people working on the other side of the border and working in German factories, has been working quite well again. After this first phase with the focus on liquidity and mobility came the second phase, where we worked to enable a slow restart. So we worked on health and safety protocols for production facilities. We agreed with the government agencies responsible on a common protocol, which can be found on our website, on basic measures to allow for health and safety at the workplace and to allow for a restart of production. The most important points are body temperature has to be checked regularly, a minimum distance of 1 meter, 1.5 meters has been kept. If it is not possible to keep minimum distance, masks, protective masks have to be worn. Assembly lines are moving slower than before, and shift changes are organized in such a way that our associates have no direct contact when shift change is taking place. So there's more time between shifts in order to enable our associates to come to their specific place of work without being in contact with too many other colleagues. So the spread of the virus is somewhat contained. So this was quite successful in Germany and throughout Europe. Factories are working now on this common basis, which is functioning well, and we have no infections having taken place up to now in production facility of our industry, which from our point of view is of course quite good. Dealerships have been allowed to reopen again end of April, beginning of May, depending on which federal state you're in. However, under very strong health and safety, restrictions. So what we see is a lot of are quite some visitors who want to look at cars, but as there has been quite some discussions on demand support schemes, the demand is picking up only very slowly. And third, we have been working on measures to optimize the work within value chains. For example, we have just finished a project together with our federal cartel office. The federal cartel office has issued a decree which allows for some closer cooperation within the value chain with regards to exchange of information, for example, on production volumes and other parameters. So the pickup after the crisis can be optimized and can be organized better, and having more legal certainty with regards to compliance concerns when it comes to competition law. So now we have all parts in place, allowing for a slow restart. So we are now in the third phase, at the beginning of the third phase. The third phase is the phase where everything depends on demand. And this is why we have strongly worked with regards with our government on how measures by the government could look like to stimulate demand on a professional scale for heavy-duty vehicles, for light-duty vehicles, but also for passenger cars. We have pointed at the good experiences we have had after the crisis 2008-2009, where a scrappage scheme has helped us to really come out of the slump quick. However, after very intensive discussions, also within the various government parties, a decision has been taken to install another kind of instrument. And the instrument the government has decided upon, which will now be implemented starting July 1st, is a 3% reduction of the VAT for everybody. So the VAT, which in Germany is at 19% for a very long time now, will be reduced to 16% starting July 1st and until December 31st. And the expectation of the government is that this 3% reduction will kickstart demand, will kickstart consumption, and will motivate consumers to regain confidence in a restart of the economy, and will motivate them to bring their euros into the shops and also, of course, into the car dealerships. Whether this will really happen remains to be seen. There is one half of economists saying that this is a really good idea and that we will see a strong restart. And there's the other half of economists who say the contrary, that this measure is not strong enough to really stimulate demand. We have discussed with our membership that companies will do their parts, in particularly OEMs will do their parts, and also dealers will do their parts to supplement this government measure by own measures to re-stimulate demand and to motivate consumers to go into the dealerships and to really think about buying a new car and try to bring up consumption again. This is not the only measure which has been taken. There have been other measures have been taken. I have some noises in my microphone, so okay. So there has been a measure which to double the support for electric vehicles. For battery electric vehicles, it's now up to 6,000 euros. For plug-ins, it's up to 4,000 euros, which will give an additional stimulus to electric vehicles. We have quite a lot of additional tax measures. Tax depreciation rules are eased. Tax deduction rules for losses have been eased. There are additional measures to support research and development. There will be additional measures for public authorities, and particularly local authorities, to invest in electromobility, in electric vehicles, in electric buses, in electric trucks and lorries. So the package is quite broad, and overall, with a volume of nearly 130 billion euros, we think that there are some very good elements in there which will help to restart the economy after all. In parallel, the European Commission is discussing a huge additional stimulus package for the whole of Europe of 760 billion euros, which has started intensive discussion between member states. So we will not see a decision on that package very soon. But if this package on a European scale is decided upon, then the European Commission will have additional possibilities to fund and to support member states with their specific measures to stimulate demand and also to stimulate people at the workplace. So after all, we are now working hard on making this push a success. A success is not cannot be taken for granted. we have to monitor closely, we have to do our part, but from now on, we can look into the near future, at least with a bit of optimism, after the hard times we've all been having with regards to shutdown and everything which has to do with the consequences this has had in Germany, and as I know also in India, where severe consequences can of course be seen. And I'm happy to answer your questions and to discuss any further items you might have. Thank you very much, dear friends. Thank you very much, Mr. Steinrücker.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Scheel, for that comprehensive overview of the situation in Germany. And now it's my privilege to welcome Vinny Mehta again. He's Director General of ACMA. Of course, he's been around also for many, many years in different fields. And he is an expert from the ground, an electrical engineer from the IIT and an MBA. And he also is an expert in international trade. But prior to joining ACMA, he headed the Manufacturers Association for Information Technology, the apex body of the IT hardware industry in India. And I think that's an interesting aspect, and that gives him an expertise in a field which is more and more important for the car industry, because today they're saying that a car is more a computer rather than a traditional automobile. And when we see how much IT today is in a car and how much more IT is going to go into a car, when we are talking about autonomous driving, when we are talking about all kind of other things, then I think Vinny can share with us aspects to the Indian car industry that maybe even in Germany we have not been dreaming of. Because one thing is for sure, the Indian Wirtschaftswunder. In Germany, the Wirtschaftswunder was probably the car industry after the Second World War. In India, the Wirtschaftswunder is the IT industry. When they put up from nothing in the 90s and early 20s, an industry from scratch, which today is one of the largest industry in the world. And therefore, I would not be surprised if in India, we'll get IT integrated in cars in a manner even more than we have it in Germany. And therefore, Vinny, you know it from both sides, and therefore we are now very much looking forward to your contribution. Vinny, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Steinrücker, and thank you for that very, very kind introduction. And of course, I'm very glad to see our friend Dr. Scheel sharing the screen space with me. We very much cherish our relationship with the VDA. We are working very well, as you all know, on the VDA ACMA SIAM joint project. It's making very good progress, and we are now in the second phase of our project. And of course, the project just happens to be, but our relationship goes back many, many years. ACMA and VDA and SIAM have been working on many projects, and we are together at most of the events. And of course, it was a delight to have the VDA team at the recent Auto Expo. And of course, the Auto Expo was a harbinger of hope, notwithstanding what happened in the aftermath of it. And yes, I think when the Auto Expo happened in the first week of February in India, we started getting the news of sort of COVID spreading at that point in time. And even there was a question mark a few days before the Auto Expo whether we'll be able to have it or not. But we were very, very lucky because at that point in time, the spread was very, very minimal, and we did take the right actions to make sure that no untoward incident happened. And as we went into March, in fact, late February to March, the impact of the COVID-19 started to show its impact on the Indian automotive industry. And we heard, if I take a step back a little bit, the import in the auto component industry of the import of the auto component in India is about 25% of the from China of the overall import that we do of the 17.1 billion. So there were certain disruptions in China which have their impact on the Indian industry as well. And as we moved ahead, we sort of started getting news of disruption in the vehicle manufacturing because of supply chain issues. And lo and behold, we were in March when our Prime Minister, for the good of the country, announced what was called as a Janta curfew, which literally means a self-imposed restriction by the people on themselves for a day's time. This was on the 22nd of March, and thereon from 24th of March, the country observed one of the strictest lockdowns in the world. I think it will be left to debate or in time to come whether we did it right or not. I'm not getting into it, but I think the intent was absolutely to make sure that lives are not lost because of the pandemic. So the first phase of the lockdown went on for the first 21 days. Thereafter, it was extended for another 19 days, which is May 3rd. And then from May 3rd to May 17th was the third phase. And then May 17th to June 8th was, I would say, somewhat relaxed lockdown in the sense that the businesses, especially the factories, were allowed to start functioning, not in unison though, bit and pieces, because people from India on the webinar would know that our country was divided or is divided into green, orange, and red zones. So getting companies to function in the red zone was a very significant challenge. Also, we are a federal republic, and each state government was allowed, the discretion to function or allowed to function, not allowed to function, and also movement on the roads, especially for the logistics, became a nightmare. So it was never ever heard in the history of the automotive industry that in the month of April, we did not sell a single vehicle. Mr. Steinrucke did mention this in his opening remarks. And of course, this meant a very, very huge economic loss, not only for the industry, but also for the nation. For the understanding of all our friends on the webinar, the automotive industry is really the backbone of the Indian economy, pretty much like Germany. In Germany, the automotive industry contributes 7% to the GDP. In India, the automotive industry contributes exactly as much, 7% to the GDP. And the auto component industry that I represent contributes about 2.5% to the GDP. The automotive industry is one of the largest employers in the country today. We employ directly and indirectly around 38 million people. And the auto component industry provides employment to 5 million people directly. Very significant in turnover, $120 billion, of which the auto component industry is almost half at $57 billion. The auto component industry is also very export competitive. We export almost a quarter of our production. We exported $15 billion in 18-19. And what is also very remarkable for this forum is that Europe happens to be our single largest trading partner. We exported, if I recollect correctly, 33% of our export to the European Union. And within that, Germany happens to be our single largest destination with 7%. Of course, Europe is a borderless entity, and therefore it does not matter whether what we send to Germany actually goes into Germany. It may go into elsewhere, and we may send anything to a port of Rotterdam, and it may find its way to Germany. So it's very difficult actually to put a number to what exactly is the trade with a particular country in Germany. But nevertheless, what is very important is that Europe as a whole and Germany in particular is a very important partner for us as an automotive industry. Also, from an import perspective, Germany is and Europe is very, very important. India imports around $17.6 billion worth of auto components, and here again, Europe accounts for one of the largest. It's 29%, which translates into about $2.5 billion US. So it's important to note that India imports $2.5 billion worth of auto components from Europe, and we export around 1 billion. This is for Germany. 2.5 billion we import and 1 billion we export. So there is a definite trade surplus, and yes, going forward, like most governments in the world, our government did come forward to support the industry. Well, in our country, the support package has not been industry specific. It has been for everybody in that sense. We are a poor country, and therefore a lot of the focus was on literally supporting the poor people, the migrant people, the farmers. While the size of the package has been humongous, it's 10% of the national GDP. I think I would highlight some of the important aspects that impact the industry. The Reserve Bank of India has been very proactive, and they have been reducing the repo rate, and they have been announcing various measures to infuse liquidity. Dr. Scheel, you mentioned about the liquidity crisis in the industry in Germany. Very similarly, because the entire automotive value chain was impacted because the sales came to a standstill. There was literally no working capital in the system, so much so that there were challenges in paying our employees. The government came with a diktat that the industry has to pay all the workers, all the employees, whether they are contractual or permanent, for the month of March, though the disruption started much earlier. And what was very interesting is that the industry did make sure that they paid. Going forward was a little bit of a challenge because come April, there was absolutely no sales happening. It is very unfortunate the way the industry is structured in India. Almost 70% of our employees are contractual. And, the way things panned out, a lot of these people are migrant laborers, and without work, most of them have gone back to their native villages. Coming back to the working capital, and considering a fact that the automotive or the auto component industry is hugely dominated by small and medium enterprises, the government stepped forward and they announced a package for 300,000 crore Indian rupees, which roughly translates into 30,000 billion euros. Okay, and there were generous loans, collateral-free loans made available to the small and medium enterprises for them to tide over the working capital challenge. Of course, the government also came forward and revised the definition of the medium, small, and MSME enterprises, as we call them, micro, small, and medium enterprises, which actually broadening the definition, which was earlier linked to only plant and machinery, now internationally linked to also turnover, makes the scope much bigger for companies to avail of government incentives. And I'm very happy to mention here that almost 65% of ACMA membership, we represent 850 members, 65% of them now qualify as MSMEs, and therefore will be eligible for incentives from the government under this, which I think is a very important delivery from a government's perspective. Having said that, I think a big challenge that remains at this juncture is of demand. As I was saying, that the month of April was without any sales. the month of May, the first half of May literally went by in industries preparing themselves for opening up. The government came up with a very detailed diktat or very detailed SOPs on safety. And because the automotive industry is dominated by several MNCs, we had a lot of exposure to good safety practices, best practices from across the world. And ACMA in turn used all these inputs. I must thank the OEMs for allowing ACMA to use these. We had a very detailed SOP which was given out to all our members to implement it so that they could follow the social distancing norms, so that they could ensure that their employees are safe. And the second half of May, if I may say, the production began. In the month of May, the capacity utilization was rather muted because there was no demand coming from the customer. Also, the dealerships were about opening up. They also had to follow a lot of the SOPs. They have to follow a lot of the SOPs that are there. And the capacity utilization in the auto component industry was about 8 to 10%. The good thing was that the government declared the agricultural industry, the agricultural equipment industry, and the farm equipment industry under essential services because the month of April and May happened to be harvest season. So, I mean, it was really good that we were fortunate enough to have a bountiful of crops in that season, which has helped a very record tractor sales. They have grown by about 6%, as I understand. Also, going forward, the schedules that we receive, that we are receiving in the month of June are, if I may say, promising compared to what was in the month of May. The two-wheelers sales are very largely dependent upon the rural economy. A significant portion of consumption in two-wheelers happens in the rural India, and that sort of because of the bountiful of crops and also the government coming forward and supporting the farmer with a minimum support price, that is helping in creating a promising future for the two-wheeler industry. I think passenger car sales will also come back. We expect, the schedules in the industry to reach 80% of what it was last year by the festive season, which is in the month of September, October. The commercial vehicle industry at this juncture, for friends from India would know that the government had a year and a half ago come up with what is called as the revising of axle norms, which allows the trucks to carry 25% more of their capacity, which in a way sucked the demand. Also, the entire industry moved from BS4 to BS6. So we believe that the commercial vehicle industry will take a little bit longer than the other sectors of the industry to come back. But considering the fact that we are a very large market, people have a lot of aspirations for owning a vehicle, and with social distancing, we believe that for the two-wheeler industry, for entry-level cars, there would be an uptick in consumption. As Mr. Steinrucke was saying that, there was something like a ravage shopping that happened in China. I heard about it, especially in Wuhan. I would be more than happy if some of it happened in India. I'm just keeping my fingers crossed. Let the good tidings prevail, so that we have more of our friends from VDA and Germany coming to the Auto Expos, and ACMA and SIAM delegations visiting the EAR show. I understand the EAR show this time has been cancelled, and I can only commiserate with you for this. It is a great occasion for industry to be together, and the trade fairs have their own energy and vibrancy. So this is how things are panning out for us today. We are still very, very hopeful that the government will come forward, the government will step forward and do something on the demand generation. I leave all that for my friend Rajesh Menon, who would be joining us shortly to say that, because the vehicle industry is a driver that pulls the entire value chain, and both ACMA, SIAM, also our friends from FADA, which is the Federation of the Dealers Association. We have been recommending to the government to make sure that there is demand creation. And I'm very hopeful that the government would, listen to our plea, because we are a very significant contributor to the economy. And I just wish that good tidings come back. Yeah, and that's what I have to say. Thank you, Mr. Steinrucke. Over to you. If there are any questions, we'll be very happy to answer.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vinny. Very much appreciated your input, your wisdom, and your experience. And of course, we all hope that the recovery will come very, very soon. So coming to some of the questions, and maybe the first question it is there to Vinny, to you. What is your view are the important measures to support international trade in the Corona times?
That's a difficult question because, what has happened today is that a lesson learned from COVID is that people are sort of looking more inwards. Every single geography is attempting to de-risk itself, and people are trying to be self-sufficient in their own way. Of course, there are pros and cons of it, but it is a challenge. And from an India perspective, what I can say is that, well, it is an opportunity for India because a lot of the countries and companies that are international are looking at an China plus one strategy. Can India market itself well? Can India offer incentives to foreign investors and attract that investment into India? These investments could serve the Indian market, and these investments could also export to other destinations, and maybe the Indian auto component manufacturers, they need to market themselves very well. They need to instill confidence in the investors, because the Indian companies definitely need a lot of technology. This is especially for tier 2s and tier 3s. So can they build this trust? Can they build this faith so that they can be more joint ventures in India, including with our friends from Germany, if that's possible? Yes, but of course, there is enough and more competition. There is a Vietnam, there is a Cambodia, there's an Indonesia, each one of them vying for the same piece of cake. And of course, the government of India is also very keen. The Prime Minister has coined a slogan which calls Atma Nirbhar. Atma means self and Nirbhar means reliant. So the Prime Minister would like all industry verticals to be more and more self-sufficient, and the self-sufficiency here is not really closing trades, but more like making the industry more competitive. And in that sense, we have to now look at the industry and the government together have to work on this and see how we can, harness the opportunity.
Thank you, Vinny. So I can see now that Rajesh has joined us. Perfect timing. Thank you very much for joining in. And I understand you are just coming out from another meeting.
Yes.
And so
yes.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for joining in. And therefore, we would now like to give the floor to you. Rajesh Menon, he's the Director General of SIAM, I mentioned earlier. And to a certain extent, similar to Dr. Scheel, He comes from CII, like BDI, and in CII he's been there since 1994, and he wore many hats. He was the Deputy Director General of CII, and he was very active in Young Indians, which is the young CII organization, and he's been in charge of many areas like energy, infrastructure, service, and agriculture. So he knows the industry very well. And now, of course, he is representing SIAM, the manufacturers, which is a huge body in India. And we are now looking forward to your presentation. Rajesh, please.
Thank you, Mr. Steinrucke. Thank you very much. First, of course, it's an honor to be present for this webinar, and thanks to VDA to get SIAM as a partner. It's a great pleasure to work with VDA and of course with IGCC. To talk about the theme of this webinar, I just want to say a few things to get the perspective from the Indian OEM side, Indian automobile manufacturing side. One, of course, is that 2019-20 was a difficult year for us, and Indian automobile industry saw a slowdown in 1920. It was a average of, or if you look at overall slowdown from an overall perspective, it was around 18%. But some segments, of course, slowed down quite more than around 30% plus, which is the commercial vehicle side. But on the overall side, we saw 18% negative growth for FY20 is 1920. Then, of course, while we were just recovering post the festival season, January, February, we had Auto Expo. We had few of you with us at the Auto Expo premises. We were just on the way. What we thought was a recovery. We're looking forward to the BS6 transition, and then we, of course, were hit by COVID and subsequent lockdown post COVID. Industry has gone through a tough time. We shut down, and as you know, the entire India Inc. was shut down in terms of manufacturing facilities. So it was a major economic loss from every aspect from an OEM perspective, but that was needed from a country perspective. We started unlocking, the country started unlocking, and so companies started coming back to some sort of a manufacturing capacity. It's been a few weeks since some companies started operations in limited capacities, but capacity utilization continues to be low. But we are hopeful that as and when we move forward, the capacity utilization starts becoming better and better. But for us, the biggest concern as of now is demand. I think, where is the demand going to come from? There are, of course, some green shoots. When I say green shoots, I mean that there is a feeling that there is a preference for personal mobility, so which will mean that you will probably see a bit of a demand for two-wheelers and for small cars. There's also a bit of a demand for small commercial vehicles because of e-commerce and importance e-commerce has in the post-COVID scenario and the post-lockdown scenario. So these are small green shoots, but overall demand remains a concern. In fact, from a SIAM perspective, we did our own understanding of outlook, and as per our outlook, if we are seeing a overall GDP of India coming to around in a negative growth band, which we are seeing -2 to -3%, if that is what we end up with, in that scenario, we're looking at -26 to -45% degrowth for the entire automobile sector, depending on segment to segment. Highest, of course, extreme element being for commercial vehicles. So if you look at it, if you combine the last year, FY20, and if you combine FY21, the current year, if we combine the two back-to-back years, the type of degrowth we'll see will take us many years back. In fact, as per our analysis, we might go back to volumes of 2010, 2011, 2012, which obviously means that we are looking at a capacity utilization which is not the best. We are looking at a 50 to 60% capacity utilization, and therefore there'll be a lot of challenges which will come out as an outcome of such a low capacity utilization. So there is a worry of efficiency, there's a worry about jobs, and of course the entire value chain becomes an issue, not just OEMs but suppliers, dealers. So these are challenges going in front of us, and demand therefore becomes a single most important concern for us. We have had several discussions with the Government of India on demand. They've given us a patient hearing. We have met all ministries, ministers, secretaries, given us a patient hearing. We are hopeful that there will be a stimulus package. Our main recommendations or requests have been one, of course, the taxation side, because we believe the last few years vehicles, the type of price increases we have seen because of various regulations, affordability has become an issue. So we have made a request from a taxation perspective, if the GST is brought down from 28% to 18%, that'll help industry, which has happened in the past. It's happened in 2013, it's happened in 2008. So that will help in giving a boost to demand. We have also said that this GST reduction can be for a temporary period, but that will really help us in giving a boost to demand. Of course, I must mention here that the Indian automobile industry is the most taxed. In India, the automobile industry is the most taxed as a manufactured product, next to cigarettes. This 28%, of course, is the highest GST rate. But then we have a composition cess which can carry it all the way up to 50%, because the composition cess varies from 1% to 22%. So these are challenges. So taxation is one suggestion we have had, that if GST can be brought down, the base rate can be brought down to 18% from 28%. Second is that we have had several interactions on a scrappage policy. We have requested the scrappage policy should be incentive based, like we have in Europe, where there are fiscal and monetary incentives given by government to a customer to incentivize him to scrap his old vehicle and buy a new vehicle. So there have been discussions happening with the government on incentive-based scrappage policy. There has been lots of comments, remarks made by ministers that they are looking at it very positively, but we are yet to see a policy being announced. We're very hopeful. The scrappage policy, when we started discussing many years back, I think was largely from the angle of climate change, but now climate change is definitely an outcome, but there will also be a big impact on demand. So that will be a major thing. Third, we have said is that if there could be a major procurement program for buses by the state transport undertakings, especially for ICE buses, which are run on diesel and CNG, if those buses can be procured in a big way, something similar to the JNNURM program many years back. And of course, we currently have a FAME 2 program from electric buses. But if we can do a similar program for procuring buses under ICE and CNG by the STUs, the state transport undertakings, that will also give a fillip to buses, which is a very major component of commercial vehicles. So scrappage policy, procurement program for buses, and the GST reduction are our three main suggestions for boosting demand. We have also had, of course, many more elements of discussions on many other elements with the government on liquidity, on dealership support, how we can include dealers as part of the MSME and as part of the MSME Act, so that they can avail those benefits which MSMEs get. So those discussions are happening, but as I said, our main concern is demand, and we are hopeful that in some form there would be an announcement or a stimulus which will help in boosting demand. So this is a broad picture of what's happening on the automobile and the automobile manufacturer / OEM side in India, and I'll be happy to take questions. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Rajesh, thank you very much for your valuable input. And of course, one of the questions that arises last week, as you know, we had the 125th AGM of CII, which was a fully digital AGM, inaugurated by the Prime Minister, first time ever, and a full day, one online session after the other. I must say, hats off to CII, how they have pulled it off, remarkable. I've never seen something similar, and I would really be keen to see whether BDI in Germany would be able to do something like that. Outstanding presentations and discussions, one after the other, and really remarkable. And in his welcome address, the Prime Minister featured exactly on what you were talking about, the self-sustainability of India, and he featured on three areas of industries. One was the furniture industry, where he said India is importing a huge amount of furniture, especially from China, and could easily produce it themselves. And they have allocated, that's what I read in the newspapers the next day, some $10 billion to put up a furniture industry in India. Then he referred to the electronics industry, especially the air conditioning industry, where due to the free trade agreement with Thailand, I think 70 or 80% of the air conditionings are all imported. A lot comes indirect also from China. Again, he allocated some $2 billion to put up electronics industry in India. And the third area he was referring to was the shoe industry, because he also there said that a lot of shoes are still imported, even though India is able to produce many shoes themselves. And then the next day in the newspapers, another area that was highlighted is the pharma industry. And there India wants to put up again some $2 billion to be more self-reliant in the pharma industry. So I was really missing, frankly, the automotive industry. And you were referring to the scrappage policy, and where Germany had good experience in 2008 or 9, very good experience. The number of cars sold and the modernization push that we got was outstanding, really remarkable. So therefore, my questions to both of you, Vinny and Rajesh, is how can we push the government to look at a scrappage policy? You've been trying it for years, I know, but what are the areas where maybe even German companies in India, even suppliers, can help with the good experience we have got with it? Maybe Vinny first.
I think somewhere, I think the mindset, if I may say so, is still somewhat socialistic, and the automotive industry probably is still seen as something like a luxury item, though we would like to differ and believe that in today's world, especially when you look at the two-wheelers or even the entry-level cars, they are a basic necessity given the state of transportation that we have, but I think I and Rajesh together have to do a lot of work together to bring home the point that the automotive industry is the economy. And as Rajesh was telling you, all the audience as well, is that this time of the year, we have worked very, very hard together, SIAM, ACMA, and VADA. We have had numerous meetings with the ministers, and I think we are inching there. And as I also mentioned, that I'm very hopeful that, in some time we should have some, incentives for the automotive industry. Rajesh is very well engaged, and some of the policies probably are in a finalization stage. It's not, probably it's a little premature to mention on a public forum at this juncture, but I'm very hopeful that things will change.
Rajesh.
Yeah, I just two points. One, of course, is that since you refer to a couple of sectors which Prime Minister mentioned in his speech, I must mention that auto components is one of those sectors which is called what they call in the terminology champion sectors. And ACMA has been working very closely with CII as part of those champion sectors. So I guess you will hear some good news very soon if Vinny continues to work the way he's working. So auto component is definitely one of those champion sectors. That's one. Second is on the scrappage part. Mr. Chandrika, I just want to mention this, that this discussion has been there for last many years. In fact, it's been 5 or 6 years. But I think the discussion took a very apex level, got a very apex level attention last year when the slowdown situation was intense. And as you would recall, there was a press conference by the Honorable Finance Minister where she announced steps for automotive industry. And in that, she made a public comment and public commitment that the government will announce a scrappage policy very soon. So that is that's a commitment given by government in a public forum. And then we have had several interactions, one with Minister Gadkari just a few weeks back. So we have been assured that it's on the anvil. There have been some discussions also on the contours of such a policy. I am very hopeful. I think we as an institution and we as automobile industry are very hopeful that such a policy will be announced very soon.
Yeah, thank you very much. Another question that has been asked, and I refer to this. Do you expect the automotive framework to adapt to a new reality after Corona? In particular, will FAME 2 be expanded to also include passenger cars. This might help OEMs to expand local production of future-proof products. Rajesh, please, you first.
I think FAME 2, as of now, is going through a very sensitive phase. There is a phased manufacturing program where we have got some targets of localization. I think this year and next year we will see how this entire localization works out, and that is of course become all the more important in the current post-COVID, post-lockdown phase. So I think we'll have to wait and watch how the FAME progresses. It's a good scheme. We have seen some good responses in the last few months, and next 1 year will be crucial to see, especially how the entire localization plan works out.
Vinny.
Mr. Steinrucke, the basic philosophy of the FAME scheme to incentivize vehicles is the public money should be stretched to the maximum. Therefore, the FAME scheme is on one end of the spectrum looking at public transportation, supports buses. If I recollect, it is the incentives are for supporting around 55,000 taxis. I think 30,000 odd are for hybrid and 25,000 for pure electric, or the other way around. I can't recollect that very well. But again, taxis because public utility. And then because the two-wheelers are a price-sensitive segment of the market, largely the not so economically well-off people use a majority of the two-wheelers. Therefore, the government incentives for the two-wheelers. I am not very sure that the government would consider extending public money for purchase of cars, where literally, the utility is very less, because you take a car to the office, it's parked there for 8 hours or more, and you just come back home. Public money should be stretched to the maximum. That's the underlying principle of the FAME scheme.
Yeah, and then of course the automatic next question is, what is going to happen to the Automotive Mission Plan 2016-2026? Are you in negotiations with the government to redraw that plan, or where do we stand at the moment? Maybe Rajesh, you start.
I think we still don't have any formal discussions on AMP going forward, but the targets, as I said in the beginning of my remarks, that we are already gone in terms of volumes, probably we'll go back to 2010, 2011, 2012 numbers. So the AMP targets will become difficult in the current context. So we'll have to see how we renegotiate and re-articulate those goals. But I think in the current context, we are looking at the next 6 months or next 12 months, and then we will see how the overarching goals will change. But the targets are looking more and more difficult at this point of time.
Vinny?
Yeah, so I concur with Rajesh. This is a rather fluid situation at this point in time, and the AMP does need to be re-looked at and redrawn.
Then maybe to Dr. Scheel a question, since the German car industry is a global player, one of the, I would say, apart maybe from the Japanese, one of the rare global players left. It's a very difficult industry. It has gone through all kind of developments over the last years. But now when you see for the German manufacturers, how does the global scenario now look like after everyone has been concentrating on China for the last years? How are you looking at markets like India, for instance, which is a typical, I would still call it emerging market, even though it has come a long way. It's now selling more cars annually, at least that was last year, than even in Germany, I understand. And so from that angle, it's certainly an interesting market. But how does the German industry look at the Indian automotive market as a market for the future?
Yes, I'm very grateful for this question, Mr. Steinrucke, because this is, of course, of utmost importance for all of us here in this exchange. From our point of view, the Indian market is, of course, a very interesting market. It is in some ways still an emerging market. In other ways, it is a very well developed market when it comes to the structures and the institutions that we have. And we are, and as I said, we are very happy to be able to work on that with our friends of ACMA and SIAM for a very long time. So if you look at the long-term potentials, I do not need to mention the number of citizens of India. I do not need to mention the economic potential of India, the growth rates of the last couple of years, the investments in infrastructure in the last couple of years, the very decisive policies with regards in particular to alternative mobility concepts the government has been taking and is taking. So all overall, this paints a picture of opportunity, and I'm very sure that as soon as the crisis draws to an end and the situation normalizes, strategic thinking will be back, and we will have the possibility to very well assess the specific strengths and the specific strategic perspectives of the international markets all around. And India, of course, will be one of them.
Yeah, thank you very much. There's one more question to Rajesh. Please elaborate your suggestion on major public procurement of buses given to government. Have you made this suggestion to state governments too?
Yeah, so we are looking at a bus procurement program which is largely funded by Government of India, and the procurement happens to state transport undertakings. So our discussions has largely been with the Government of India. This is very similar to the program which was done many years back, which is a JNURM program, and similar to the FAME2 scheme, which is again Government of India scheme, but that's for electric buses. So our discussions have been with the Government of India and with Niti Aayog in particular, along with Ministry of Heavy Industries.
Yeah, thank you very much. Dr. Scheel, there is a question for you. Which are important regulations and standards to mutually consider and work on to implement?
Well, I mean, many of those have been mentioned. Everything which has to do with environmental legislation, emission side, but also the incentive side. We already have been talking about the very difficult transition with regards to the newest schemes concerning the emissions of cars. So this will in the medium and long term not be the end. In Europe, we already have a discussion on Euro 7 standards. So we have a strong discussion on further strengthening also the CO2 standards. All these discussions, of course, will sooner or later, like wave ripples, also have consequences for discussions on a national scale in other parts of the world, and I'm sure also in India. So these are the major issues we will have to work upon. And then, of course, the huge discussion we are having is what is the long-term perspective on the evolution of mobility in the broader sense. So what role will cars play compared to other modes of transport in the long run when we see digitization taking hold in the mass markets, when we see some levels of automated driving taking hold in the mass markets, and all of this requires lots of attention and common work.
Yeah, thank you very much. Another question, Dr. Scheel. In the beginning of the COVID crisis, the main challenge were the supply chains, because the supply chains basically broke, especially out of China. And in the days of just in time, people discovered that they were depending on suppliers, sometimes only just one supplier. There's that rumor that in the world, there's only one single manufacturer of small batteries for electrical motors, and that manufacturer is in Wuhan. And the whole world only had enough supply for 3 months of these batteries. Maybe that problem is solved now, I don't know, but certainly the world is re-looking at the supply chain. And in the automotive industry, I think the supply chain industry has been mastered. But with COVID, it came to a standstill. How do you see the development of supply chains locally? Will we have a more regional supply chain system? Will we have a more sort of supply chain system with 2, 3, 4 suppliers, so one is not depending on one single one? How do you see the development here? Because for India, being also a big supplier to the world and even maybe becoming a bigger one, the policy on supply chain will be crucial.
Yes, this is a very good question, though, of course, a very difficult one. And probably it's yet too early to really go into some measure of depth with regard to this crisis, because, of course, the crisis has shown that the international division of work and labor, of development and production, is a very, very complex system, and it is also a complex system which is prone to disruption on one hand. On the other hand, it has huge benefits, because you can profit of economies of scale, you can profit of relevant production capacities and facilities in different countries or parts of the world. So all overall, I would the international division of labor, free trade and free flow of goods has greatly has given great profit not only to our industry but also to societies at large from our point of view. So whether a new balance has to be struck remains to be seen, because the balance between a division of labor, the balance between economies of scale, the balance between certain modes and certain production framework situation for production on one hand, and the vulnerability of supply chain has to be really balanced on a case-by-case basis. We always have seen companies also differentiating themselves a little bit in this regard, and so I would say this is a discussion for the coming years to come, and now it's probably much too early to really say what the trend will be.
Thank you. Then I have a question to Rajesh with regard to the basically rebound or comeback of the industry. When we look at 2008, 2009 during the financial crisis, India was not so bad affected, but also affected a little bit, and then it bounced back very, very fast. And when we look at what happened the last 2 years before COVID, when the Indian automotive industry was already on the decline, the reasons pinpointed were pretty clear. Of course, costs were going up, but one of the reasons was also the lack of financing, because many of the finance companies were in trouble, and so they couldn't finance the cars, and that is why many people couldn't buy new cars. And finally, of course, it was BS4 to BS6. Those are the main reasons why the decline was there. Now, when we take these reasons and try to basically work on them, what, from your point of view, would be the key elements to bring the demand back? Is it finance? Is it maybe drop in GST? Is it to make sure that the people now, since the new BS6 cars are in the market, that they now buy new cars, because many of the cars are now really getting old? What do you think should be the trigger to get people buy cars again?
I would say it's a combination of financing and combination of affordability. When I say affordability, pricing is a very important component of it. So both are very important. When I say on financing perspective, of course, there have been some decisions and announcements. The government of India reported is already down. We have been requesting banks to pass on to the consumer. So there are, from a policy perspective, from a monetary policy perspective, things have changed quite a bit, and things are These are good and important decisions which have been taken in the last few months. So liquidity, from that perspective, things are much better. We only hope that the rates are transferred to the consumer and things become better on the transaction side. But I just want to mention one more thing, is because in the year and a half back or 2 years back, when a consumer was going to buy a car or buy a two-wheeler, he typically, broadly, you were looking at a 90% would probably was what was funded by a finance company, and 10% was upfront money was putting in. But thanks to increased cost from the other side, your road tax going up, your insurance you have to pay for 3 years and 5 years if you're buying a car 3 years and buying a two-wheeler 5 years. Thanks to all those costs, your upfront requirement of payment made by a consumer went up. So your money which will be financed came down. So the proportion changed a bit. So that caused lots of issues. Ability to immediately pay and immediately buy became an issue. So financing continues to be a concern, but things have changed quite a bit from the policy side. The second is, of course, is affordability. And our affordability, there is one, of course, is that if the taxation structure is changed and the GST rate is brought down, that will make things much easier to boost demand. That has, of course, been our recommendation, our request for some time now, and we are hopeful something will happen. But on the other side, we have made a sincere request that nothing should happen in the next 2 to 3 years in terms of regulations to make the cost go up again. And I think that has been a very major engagement which we're having for some time now. There are regulations which are supposed to come from October this year, coming up April next year. So we have been having these discussions and saying some of these can be deferred, some of these can be relooked at, timelines. So we don't want things to regulations to come up in such a way that cost goes up again. We already have a problem. We don't want the problem to become much more worse. So these are the two issues. One is, of course, affordability from a taxation perspective, from a regulation perspective, and second, of course, liquidity and financing.
Vinny?
Yes. Rajesh has covered it all. I think from an industry point of view, yes, liquidity in a way has been addressed. It needs to be passed on to the consumers. And you've been lucky that the government in Germany has been sort of receptive, and the GST rates have been brought down from 19% to 16%. We've been making a plea to the government that on the vehicles, if for a limited period it could be reduced. Vehicles, as Rajesh said, are one of the most taxed in the country today, at 28% GST, plus there is another cess, and it can take the rate as much as to 50%. So if that could be brought down by 10% from 28 to 18%. Similarly, on the component side, we've been making a plea that if all components would be at 18%, today some are at 28% and some at 18%. I think even if it's done for a short period, it could be a shot in the arm and help consumption.
Yeah, I think we're coming to the end of our webinar. If I see it right, I would like to come back to CII, because CII is so close to the industry. The outgoing CII president was an automotive man. The new CII president is a banker. The next CII president, I understand, is a motorcycle man. So from that angle, I think CII has it all there. And Rajesh, as a former CII man, I think the lobby in India, which is extremely strong, you have to now sit together and get a package structured with the automotive industry, with the banker, with the motorcycle industry, and then push the mobility industry into a new area. And I think we should all take this Corona crisis as a chance. Never miss a good crisis, as they say. I think we have ample opportunities, and India has shown in so many cases, and I have been here for now so many years, I've seen it again and again, that somehow India, the Indian industry is able to pull itself out of the most difficult situations and then bounce back. And I'm positive that this will also happen with the automotive industry. We have all the opportunities that are out there. We have to fight for it, of course. And I can tell you, ACMA, SIAM, and of course VDA, we all together, and of course us as the chamber, I think we together can do wonders. Of course, we have to do it. This was one step today with our webinar here. This will be not the last one. We have a long agenda ahead. And finally, I can tell you, it was mentioned that the IAA was cancelled. Well, this was in September, the truck IAA. The IAA next year, the passenger car IAA, will be in Munich, and it will be a different IAA from Frankfurt, of course, and it will be back to back with the Oktoberfest, which was also cancelled this year, by the way. So from that angle, I think we have a lot to look forward to next year. 2021 will be the year of recovery, but 2022 will be the year where we will be hopefully back where we were before. And 2022 will be a critical year for India, because in 2022, India will be the host of G20 and Germany will be the host of G7. So therefore, I can tell you in the year 2022, which will be hopefully the new normal, India and Germany will have a lot to do together, and we're looking forward to that. Thank you very much for joining us here today. I wish you a good day. Thank you and goodbye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You.
Bye-bye.
Bye.